Welcome to our Beef Special Edition featuring Dr. Dan Thompson. Tonight's program is being recorded and you will receive a link to the recording after we have finished polishing it up by adding closed captioning. The extension educators facilitating tonight's session include Amanda Kaufman, Mel Halfman, Carolyn Eady, Ryan Steary, and myself, Sandy Stitchen. We would ask you to stay muted throughout the presentation in order to reduce background noise. Participation in tonight's session earns those already certified in BQA 1 Wisconsin BQA Continuing Education Unit. At some point during the presentation, we will take attendance for those of you who want this CE. Pay attention for that announcement. You will then receive an email with the certificate from tonight's session, along with directions for how to redeem that certificate with the Wisconsin Beef Council. You cannot earn CE by watching recordings of the sessions. The upcoming February 23rd session also provides 1 CE. Lastly, before handing the microphone off to Carolyn, I would invite you to visit our livestock extension site where you can find resources for meat, beef, poultry, and decision tools, and you can view our programs. For example, our small ruminant webinars and the Badger Swine Symposium. And with that, I'm turning to Carolyn Eady, who will kick off our session with a couple of poll questions.
First of all, our first poll, what type of operation are you involved with? You can check all that apply. So cow-calf, when you're selling your feeder calves, feedlot, both cow-calf selling feeder calves and feedlot or other. Number 2 is my preconditioning program includes, check all that apply, respiratory vaccines, castrating bull calves, bunk broke prior to selling, or my vet's helping me with the preconditioning protocol. So go ahead and answer those questions. Great, we have lots of information coming in. Very good. All right, I'm seeing a lot of cow-calf people and a lot of people who are also finishing those calves in the feedlot. It's coming in. I will share the results with you here in a second. All right, I'm going to end polling, so I hope that everyone is in. Okay. All right, so here are our results. The majority of you at 39% are cow-calf producers selling your feeder calves. And then the second highest is both cow-calf selling feeder calves and into the feedlot. We have a lot of you that are doing your respiratory vaccinations, castrating your bull calves, and you're breaking them to use the feed bunk. Clostridia vaccines, and separating calves from cows immediately after selling the calves. So very good. And then I have one more poll for you. So thank you for participating. This just helps us gather lots of information. And our second poll is about calf arrival. So as number 1, as arrival weight of feeder calves increases, the death loss of cattle on feed decreases. So these are your thoughts and your ideas about these statements. So true, false, I don't know, and rather not guess. So that's number 1. Or what is the first thing a calf after a long haul wants to do in the receiving pen? Does it want to drink water? Does he want to eat hay? Does he want to lie down and take a little break, or get back on the truck? So in your experience, you can go ahead and answer these questions. These are some of the things that Dr. Thompson's going to cover with us tonight. So that's all right if we're not guessing right, or we don't know the answer. We're going to learn those this evening with Dr. Thompson. So I'm going ahead and end polling. Sharing the results. Very good. You guys got the first one right. True. As the arrival weight of a feeder calf increases, the death loss decreases. Very good. And actually, the first thing that calf wants to do once it gets off the truck, he wants to go lay down, take a little break. We can imagine that he's been standing a long time in that bouncy old truck and he wants to lay down. So Dr. Thompson's going to cover that. And before I get started, although he doesn't want me to, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction. So Dr. Thompson received his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from Iowa State University in 2000. Among his many accomplishments, Dr. Thompson received the Zoetis Distinguished Service Award, American Association of Bovine Practitioners Award in 2018, and served as a Jones Professor in Veterinary Medicine at Kansas State University from 2006 to 2020. He moved to Iowa State University in 2020 and currently serves as a chair of the Animal Science Department at Iowa State University. So welcome back to the Midwest, Dr. Thompson, and the controls are all yours.
Yeah, somebody put Mr. Doc Talk on there. Somebody's watching RFD. We do appreciate that. And thank you very much to Sandy and for Carolyn for the great introduction. And thanks for having me. And we will hit this year our 500th episode of Doc Talk. Who would have thought it? But anyway, it's been on RFD for 10 years, and it's really good to be back to the Midwest. It's good to be participating here with our neighbors in Wisconsin, and so thanks for having me where we can do this. And I'll share my Sandy, can you oh, wait a second, I know what I got to do. I gotta go back to share screen.
Yep.
And hit that.
Perfect.
And I think we're in good shape now. So anyway, you know, a lot of things that I know about starting calves on feed and managing new calves is I learned quite a bit of it in a book, but not a lot of the things that counted. And then you start to think about the interaction we have with weather and people and housing and all the different things that go on. And so some of the things we're going to present or talk about tonight, and you can stop me as we go or chat in the box, but you know, we're going to talk about getting these calves off the ground and get them going. So when I get called to a feedlot, and I saw next week you're going to have Dr. Dorte on, and I've had her down to work in our feed yards with us on Harry Hillworth, so you're in for a treat, as you already know with that. But you know, when I walk into a place with a high mortality episode, so someone says, "Hey, we're having too many deads. Will you please come out here?" The first thing you've got to do whenever a situation like that happens, you have to go to that quiet spot in your brain, and that is this a morbidity issue or is this a case fatality rate issue? And a morbidity issue is we're just having a lot of sickness, and if you have a lot of sickness, you're going to have more death loss. The case fatality rate is if I'm having the same level of sickness as normal, but we're having higher than normal death loss. And I wish I had $1 for every time someone told me the drug quit working and we got to switch, because most of my experiences have been not that way. Most of my experiences, you know, when I was at Cactus Feeders, we bought 25,000 head of cattle a week, and I was their only veterinarian. And so I got to learn a lot of failures, but the one thing that really wasn't ever a failure was which drug I was using. I could make about any drug work at any time, as long as one of our modern drugs for bovine respiratory disease. And so I started to try to figure out how we could get away from focusing on the case fatality rate problem, which didn't tend to ever be much of an issue, and focus more on morbidity. Case fatality rate is the number of cattle that are treated that died divided by the total number of treated. And you never thought the general public would learn so much about something like this as what they have with COVID. But when you hear senators and politicians talking about morbidity and case fatality rate, it's an understanding that, in my opinion, 10% of the cattle that are truly sick with bovine respiratory disease are going to die regardless of what we do with them. And therefore, our case fatality rates usually run around 5 to 10%. And I think the big thing about case fatality rate is that we're really good as producers of keeping track of death loss, but we don't do a very good job of keeping track of the number of animals we treat. And it's vital to be able to do that. So here's the scenario to just give you an example. If a producer had 1% death loss last year and 5% this year, they either want to change drugs or veterinarians, and they're not too particular on which one. So when I asked them, well, how many sick cattle did you have last year? Well, we pulled 10% of the population. Well, what about this year? We pulled 50%. So the problem at this point in time, our case fatality rate's the same. The drugs working the same, the crews are working the same, the housing, everything's working the same. The problem is something triggered morbidity. And when morbidity goes up, you know, we start to dig back through the production and understanding of, did we buy the same source of calves, or the same weight, or the same sex? What viral antigens have they been exposed to? BVD, IBR, different things of that nature. Weather and people. Gary Gentry told me, he used to manage Lubbock County Feed Yard, and he said the three most inconsistent things in the world are cattle, weather, and people. And that's what we deal with every day. Prior nutrition, how long did we haul the cattle, evenness, you know, to have a steer that's like the one here in this picture, and a group of these come in and expect 0 death loss, we really have to have an understanding of proper expectations. And sometimes we call these opportunity cattle, but most of the time we call them high risk, not just because of the economic risk of not being able to hedge them or to project them, but the health risk as well. If I refer to a feedlot consultant survey during this presentation, it'll be a presentation paper that I wrote in 2014, where I surveyed 23 feedlot consultants to just kind of get a baseline or state of the industry of cattle health and practices for new calves coming in. So instead of starting with case fatality rate, we'll start out with morbidity. And one of the things that influences morbidity is cattle flow, because we get cattle when we run out of grass in the feedlot. So all of a sudden we're sitting there all summer and we're shipping fats, and then we get to where we don't have any cattle in the yard, and we're painting pipe fence with socks on our hands. And then all of a sudden the grass starts to dwindle and people start bringing cattle in off of grass. And when they do that, that's when they start hitting the sale barn, and that's when we start buying cattle and bringing them in. And the thing that dictates the flow into a feed yard is exactly that, the market. And so we'll sit there and we'll have this grand plan of, we're not going to buy this many high risk calves, but when it comes to it, we have to fill the feed yard. And so when we overwhelm the system and overwhelm the facilities is when I start to see major issues, because high risk calf issues are not linear. They're quadratic and exponential in the problems that they cause. The more high risk calves you have on your facility, the higher risk your low risk cattle become, because you don't spend any time with the low risk cattle. You're spending all your time with it's kind of like managing people. You spend 90% of your time with 10% of the people, and cattle aren't any different. We spend 90% of our time with the 10% of the ones causing us problems. This was one of your questions. This is on millions of head of data, but if I can get a calf to 6 weight, I can decrease morbidity and mortality tremendously. And so as we go from 4 weight cattle here on the left down to 6 weight, you can see we have a significant decrease in death loss. And I had a producer who ran a grow yard that he bought 4 weight and 5 weight cattle, and I just said, there's an easier way. He was 65 years old. He ran 8,000 head by himself. He had a quadriplegic son that he was helping take care of that was in his 40s. And I just said, Gene, we can do some things that are different. And so we bought some 650 weight steers. And he called me up about a week later. He says, I'm bored. He said, there's nothing to do. None of them are sick. None of them are. And but then on the flip side, about a month or two later, he called me up and he said, hey, we got to switch antibiotics. And I said, what'd you do? He said, well, my old order buyer from Tennessee called, and he had a group of 4 weights. It was just priced so right. I couldn't. And I was just like, I can, it's like crack cocaine. And so you gotta work with this and have discipline and work hard to source your cattle. But this one's a big one on the way in. The other one is commingling, and SB is sale barn, OB is order buyer, and then CF is cattle feeder. And I can flip this little scenario into South Texas, into the upper Midwest, and now with dairy beef and things, the commingling in sale barns and commingling into these different different types of housing systems is causing us a lot of grief. And so when I was at Cactus, I bought a back tag reader because there's a back tag on every calf. And so as they came in, I started scanning their back tags, and we found that cattle coming out of order buyer stations averaged coming from 5 different states and 32 different sale barns per load, 100 head load. And, you know, go back to some of the things we're talking about with COVID. Go back to some of the things that we're talking about with biosecurity and understanding. When we think, it amazes me that we get upset with 2 or 3 or 4% death loss when what we put some of these animals through. I just think they're so resilient, and it's just absolutely amazing. But when they're going into these sale barns and order buyer stations, and they're not prepared for the change of address, and they're not prepared for getting hit with stress of transport, not being vaccinated, not being castrated before, lots of different things that set these animals up. There's 2 reasons why an animal gets sick: either an overwhelming dose of a pathogen or a suppressed immune system. And so these calves that are really stressed, they get exposed to new pathogens. It's a double whammy. Likewise, we take a calf out of the mountains of New Mexico that's never seen a pathogen in its life, and it's roly-poly and it's doing great but never been vaccinated. It gets overwhelmed with the diseases in the feed yard. So preparing these animals is vitally important. Transportation is another one. You know, it used to be 8 hours was long haul for cattle. Now that's like local cattle, and we have so much work to do. If there's one thing I get to do, I will not be a department head or an administrator my entire career. I can tell you that. I've got to do it for a year, and it's been rewarding, but I don't get to spend time in the trenches, and I don't get to spend time doing what I love. But when I get a time to do this, I will work on designing a better cattle trailer to haul cattle for temperature, for airflow, for rehydration. I don't know what it's going to be, but something that people don't see manure splattered down the side while they're going down the road, as well. But we'll do some things that'll make some improvement. But these are big time deals. When I have cattle, thin-hided cattle from California being shipped into Dodge City, Kansas, and they're going over the Sierra Nevadas, and they're getting chilled down. Cold weather cripples lightweight calves. Hot weather cripples fat cattle. And so having an understanding of air circulation, hot metal tops, smokestacks and carbon, all these things play into things. And just as we mentioned earlier, just standing. After 15 hours on a truck, a calf will start to lay down on the truck. And so some of these things that we use to gauge what's going on when these calves get into the yard. Another thing that causes me a lot of issues is, and it doesn't matter what size your feed yard is, but add-ons. And add-ons are this: not all of our pens are built exactly in the size of a load lot that we buy. So I may have a 200 head pen, and I bought 50 head of calves at the sale barn this week, and I got another 75, and I keep adding on to the pen. And what we have found is that if it takes you longer than a week to build a pen, you're going to have trouble with respiratory disease. And you have new pathogens being exposed. You have animals at different stages of the disease. You have animals at different levels of intake and consuming that starter diet. And so we have a lot of issues with add-ons. And if you think about it, those calves get commingled at the sale barn, they get commingled at the order buyer station, and then they get to the feed yard. And if our pens, that's the reason why one load pens are the best, 100 head pens, because when they come in off that truck, I can unload that truck and put those calves in that pen, and I'll have to add on. I get into even trouble. I had a guy in Ohio that was because of his procurement habits at the sale barn, buying 10 head or 15 head a week, he would bring them home and it would take him a month to build a pen. And so we started just working on making smaller pens so he could keep them separate and get them started, and made a big difference. The first thing calves do want to do when they come in is they want to lay down, and you'll see calves almost do like a Pete Rose head first slide into the dirt because they're so exhausted. Yes, they do want to eat. Yes, they do want to drink water and eat hay. But if you unload a group of calves into a receiving pen that are in hock deep mud and they're sitting there shaking, it's not because they're cold. It's because they're exhausted, physically exhausted. And sometimes we get into this trap that if we can't fix if we can't clean the whole pen, we can't clean it at all. And sometimes what I'll do is just hook onto a box blade and I'll just go make a lap around the pen. And you come out the next morning, those cattle are all just laying in that track that you made. Conversely, in the summer, bare dirt floors get hot. And the first sign of heat stress is cattle start to stand up because the dirt floor gets too hot. And that's one of the things covered cattle feeding has a huge advantage on, both the mud and the heat stress. And I think you'll see a lot of people move into covered cattle feeding over the next 2 decades, even in the western parts of the United States, because we can't keep having this area, where cattle are exposed. Mud and heat stress are 2 big issues for us. But one of the things you can do to alleviate that heat stress is you can put down straw in the summertime. I know we always bed cattle in the winter, but you can bed cattle in the summer and it'll decrease that pen floor temperature by 25 to 30 degrees. It's quite amazing. People ask me, when do we process cattle? Generally speaking, I'll process cattle. I'll give them an hour to rest for every hour they're on the truck. And so if they were local cattle, I'll process them right off the truck. But just remember, processing is not a timed event. When people come in and have me consult their feed yard or their operation, I look at their, if the facilities are dirty or not taken care of, they either don't have time or they don't care. And both of those are a problem as we move forward. Now, it's not going to be pristine and we're not going to eat off the floor, but that gives me a pretty good gauge of the pride in the operation and what I can have old equipment, no problem. But the only way you get to have old equipment that works well is if you take care of it and keep it clean. And then, how we handle those cattle, you are the welcome wagon to these cattle. It's the first time they're going to meet their new caregivers. And if you just imagine if you went into the hospital and the orderly just jabbed you the hot shot and said, jump in that bed and didn't give you any warning and gave you an injection and that, we're trying to build trust in these cattle with us from the time that they get on the premise. So this is the Sandy has my presentation, and Sandy, you can share this with anybody, okay? You can give them the copy of it if anybody wants to get a PowerPoint, or if you want to put it on a PDF. Anybody that wants it, so you don't have to write all this down. But in general, with vaccinations on cattle that are coming in the yard, the one thing we give to all calves, whether it's high risk or low risk, is that 5-way modified live viral vaccine. And we do not delay that vaccine. We give that vaccine at the initial processing because we want to get antibody. If there's another thing we've learned on COVID is antibody matters, right? And whether we're talking about IBR or BBD or coronavirus, having an antibody to these viruses is important. So we would prefer to have them vaccinated before they get to the feed yard twice. But if they don't, we're going to vaccinate them with a 5-way modified live viral on arrival. Clostridials, you can see that most people are down there at that 40 to 30% of giving them. I give a blackleg, 7-way blackleg to all cattle that come into the feed yard. I don't revac with it ever, even though the nutritionist will beg you to do it and say it'll stop bloats or acidosis. The only reason it does that is because when you bring them into the chute and you hit them with the blackleg extra in a revac is the jostling them around and the pain from the black leg knocks them off feed long enough to keep them from getting acidosis or bloat. I will use one on arrival, and I will use a tetanus toxoid or an 8-way clostridial if I'm going to ban those bulls at the same time. So I give a tetanus when I ban. I give a 7-way blackleg to all cattle coming in. And then when you get down here to the Mannheimia vaccine, 75% of veterinarians are recommend that you give them that on the high-risk calves, get the Mannheimia. But we don't give any of these Bacterns to the low-risk calves. So calves that have been weaned, calves that have been preconditioned, we're going to hit them with a 5-way modified live viral and a blackleg, and that's going to be it. The high-risk calves, a lot more numbers jumping around here, but at the end of the day, the difference between high risk and low risk is really we're going to add that Mannheimia vaccine on arrival. This is a calf that died. This is 2005. I love this picture. He died out on the top of the Flint Hill there, out south of Manhattan, and you can see that his eyes are hemorrhaged, his prolapsed, his back end, he's got singes down there. This animal died of lightning strike. And I don't show this at a lot of vet meetings because if I do, the next year there'll be a bunch of vaccines on the market against lightning strike. And they'll work just about as good as some of the ones we're jamming in cattle today. But I do classify this as a digestive dead, not a veterinary dead, because if it had been properly fortified, there's no way it would have been out on top of that Flint Hill grazing when that storm came up. So I can take that one off my books. When calves come in and they're high risk, the number one tool in the toolbox to decrease morbidity and mortality is metaphylaxis. And metaphylaxis is mass treatment with an antibiotic coming off the truck. So these are cattle. What I'm telling you about is the number one thing we'd like to do is prepare them so they don't get sick. But if they're coming into your feed yard and it's after the fact, and these are high health risks, long haul, haven't been vaccinated, haven't been castrated, don't know what a bunk is, don't know what a water tank is, giving those calves a dose of one of our modern antibiotics that is labeled for metaphylaxis or for mass treatment on arrival will decrease your morbidity by 50% every time. And if you're expecting 60% morbidity, you'll have 30%. If you're expecting 30%, you'll have 15%. And so I'm a big believer in using it to decrease. And the other thing is that it'll improve the performance of the cattle that you don't find, that were sick, that you didn't find. When we ask veterinarians if they use metaphylaxis on high-risk calves, 100% do. Not so many. Hardly any use it on low-risk calves. And then when we asked about feed-grade antibiotics, a lot of people are using them on both high-risk and low-risk cattle. And obviously, we have some issues going on in our industry that we'd like to get away from some of these CTC add-ons, but I have found them to be beneficial as well at that 10 mg per pound dosage rate for 5 days straight off the truck. When you start to talk about things that cause increase in morbidities, if you buy bulls rather than steers, you will have much higher mortality. We'll see an increase of 165 to 150 to 160% morbidity, 160% increase in railers and realizers and death loss. Horns, when those calves, and I always tell people, when it comes to bull calves, castrate them early. The longer the testicles are attached to the calf, the more attached the calf is to the testicles. And if we can get them done well before they get in the feed yard, horns we should disbud calves just like our dairy industry does instead of dehorning. If we're putting a tag in their ear, we can feel on their head and cauterize those buds off their head. And then the other one that's just a huge issue for us in feed yards, at least in the 20% of cattle heifers coming into feed yards today are bred. And 10% of those are long bred, meaning 2% of them have a fetus inside that's more than 5 months of gestation. So these are some things that when you look at our industry and things that we really need to promote and clean up: early castration, disc budding, and guaranteed open heifers. We, when we looked at morbidity and mortality, when we came up with our Jeff Foxworthy, it's going to be a wreck when, he has his one, you might be a redneck if, and this one was, ours was, it's going to be a wreck when more than 1% of their body weight is testicles. Okay, when these little thin-budded calves that are older, they're coming in there to be castrated, you're going to have 140% the morbidity, the mortality, and the Rayleigh rates. And these are conservative. This is just a paper we published. But it's when you buy those animals, when you buy those bull calves, and you think that you're going to get away with castrating them on arrival, just remember that there's a huge difference in animals that you're going to castrate on the stress they're going to go through than ones that have already gone through it. People ask me, when should we do it? And we'll vaccinate those calves right on at arrival processing. Some people will say, well, I'm going to wait 2 weeks. And when we do that, you'll wind up with too many cattle that are sick, that are trying to recover. And if you wait till the first implant, you'll get too staggy, and you'll start to get fat deposition in the scrotum. And so we want to just go ahead and get it done as soon as possible and get it out of the way. Another thing that is really key for you to judge morbidity of a pen, and this was from Todd Milton, a nutritionist. He did this on, sick cattle don't eat, and cattle that don't eat get sick. And you want your calves eating 1.5% of body weight by a week and a half on feed. If they're not eating a week and a half, or eating 1.5% of their body weight by a week and a half on feed, there is bovine respiratory disease percolating, and they're not coming on. So 1.5 by 1.5. So by 10 days on feed, we want them at a. Otherwise, there's something going on in there. I already talked a little bit about this, about the size of pens for feeding these calves, and we like to have 100-head pens, 1-load pens. For bunk space on calves, I don't even measure. I just want them all to be able to get to the bunk at once. If they're fighting over the bunk, or that the passive calves don't get to the bunk, and I have been at feed yards that had such little bunk space that they're saying these calves are dying, we don't even know why. There's no visible lesions. And I opened up their rumen, and they hadn't eaten. They get pushed out. The little calves in the pen get pushed off the mound, they get pushed out of the windbreak, and they get pushed away from the feed bunk. And so we've got to make sure. I almost think, when we sort cattle when we sort fats at the end of the deal, we might be making as much money if we started sorting dinks off like our swine industry folks do, and just making kind of a pen of misfits that can compete with each other. But these are some of the things that you have to think about. Let's take a little break there, Sandy. If there are questions or comments. And
at the moment, there are no questions in the chat box.
I had one though.
Okay.
Right from the beginning, you said you like to see the 700-800 pounders coming in on arrival. Is there an upper weight limit? I mean, what if are 1,200 pounders too heavy? Are there problems if they're too heavy coming in? That's my question.
Well, the thing is, we're feeding these things to the size of elephants now. So I don't know if anybody knows that, but our feed efficiency has changed, and we have to start having a mentality change, because when we sold everything live feed efficiency or feed to gain was so important. Well, now that we sell it on a carcass, our measurement should really be carcass efficiency. So carcass weight gain per feed. And when we get to the end of that feeding period, and the head is done growing, and the organs are done growing, and the skeleton is done growing, 85% of what we're putting down that last 30 days on these fat cattle is carcass. It's the most efficient time. It used to be the most inefficient time. Now it's the most efficient growth when we start to look at carcass. When for what we're selling or what we're getting paid on. But I mean, for health reasons, there isn't any size limit or anything like that. It'd be more economics and what you got them bought at and what you got them placed at and what you're going to sell them at. But I can tell you that one of the things that was very challenging for me one year was we took possession of about 10,000 mercantile cattle that people delivered the cattle on the contracts to the sale barn rather than make their calls. And we brought in 10,000 head of finished cattle, and it took us 30 days to straighten those animals out after they'd been hauled and that. So there can be probably some issue with that. Probably don't think you're going to get rid of them quite as fast as you think you might if you've got to kind of get them straightened out.
Okay.
Lots of things. So let's talk about case fatality rate. And this is and part of it is these cattle just don't show us clinical signs, and we're finding them after they're way too sick. And I'll be honest with you, we just don't do a very good job of finding sick cattle. And cattle over the years have evolved to make sure in this predator-prey relationship that they don't show weakness, because if they show weakness, then they get preyed upon. And so if they show that they're sick or they show clinical signs, and so it's when we're horseback or we're walking through the pens and looking for sick cattle, it's extremely difficult. We did a study where we went to the packing plant and we looked at lungs, and we broke it down into categories of 3. This guy, first of all, gave me this like 20-point scale to measure these lungs. And the first one went by, and one goes by every 6 seconds. And I'm not smart enough to have a 20-point scale. So I made an executive decision and changed it. And we're going to go with either no lung lesion, moderate lung lesions, or severe. And severe was when they pulled the pluck, the lungs were adhered to the rib cage, and the only thing that came out was the trachea, some remnants of lungs, and the heart. Okay? In between that was moderate. And what I just wanted to show you is that this was a research study, so we knew what we'd pulled and what we hadn't pulled. We pulled 26% of the cattle for respiratory disease, and only 62% of them had lesions at slaughter. But 43% of them had lung lesions that were severe. These are the animals that lived, that went to slaughter. The thing that was most ironic to me was we deemed 74% or 3/4 of those cattle to have no health problems, and 43% of those animals had lung lesions at slaughter, and 1/3 of them were so severe they were adhered to the rib cage, and we never caught them. We never saw them. And so nearly 25% of the cattle in that pen had severe lung lesions. So what I'm trying to get at is we think we're good at finding sick cattle, and some people are. But until you acclimate the cattle and they trust you and they understand you're a caregiver, they're not going to show you the clinical signs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what does it cost us in performance? Really this is a lot of busy numbers, but when you look at no lung lesion versus moderate versus severe, at 85 days on feed, there was already a 13-pound difference in performance in body weight between no lung lesions and moderate, and there was a 43-pound difference in no lung lesions and severe. And then the outweights, you can tell this was a while ago when we were selling 1,300-pound animals, but we had a 53-pound outweight advantage in cattle that do not have lung lesions. Now, somebody will say, well, can we resolve lung lesions? I don't think so. Everything I've seen is that the thing that you have to understand is that I think we can catch them sooner and keep them from becoming severe, but I don't think that we'll ever erase moderate or erase some sort of lesion. Another reason why we have a problem with case fatality rate is the number of people. And when we don't have enough people, it takes, I really don't care so much about the numbers here. Just know that it takes twice as many people to take care of high-risk calves as it does low-risk calves. And when I hear people in the fall buy a whole bunch of calves and say, well, we sure could use some help, but we're just going to have to suck it up and get through it. It'll all be better in the spring anyway, and then we won't need that help. Just understand that you're going to see the increase in death loss, the increase in morbidity, because, again, let's go back to COVID, right? When we said we were going to flatten the curve with COVID, we didn't say we were going to decrease the number of people getting sick. We said we were going to change the time in which everybody got sick so we didn't overwhelm our hospitals, right? So that and I can tell you that just like our healthcare workers in these hospitals, when they're rolling beds out into the hallways, if we have tails over the fence in our hospital pen and we have so many sick cattle and you're doctoring cattle with the headlights because you're there at night, people get tired, they get exhausted, and they start missing things, and case outcome suffers. So making sure you have enough people is vitally important to the outcome as we go. I'll have people ask, well, how many times a day should we ride these calves? And you know, a lot of people like to walk through their calves twice a day. I'm of the opinion if you can go through them once really, really well, and then drive back and look over the alley, and if you see one sick, get it in later in the day to treat it, great. But for the most part, people are recommending twice. My favorite thing on the calves, and I hope this video will play, we'll see, is putting hay out. And hay on new calves is about as important as vaccines. This is a feed yard in Ingalls, Kansas that I consulted a year ago. And when I see, it said it was, there it goes. So we put hay out on these calves, and we'll put cereal hay out. But when these cattle come in and they're eating like this, and I put hay out, something that's familiar to them, I have a pretty good idea that our vaccines are going to work, that our endecticides are going to work, and different things. I love it here at the end of this deal. You'll see this fat steer in the pen next to him when he gets up there. He's like, they're all lined up. Where's mine? You know, they're on 4 ration. But you know, cattle crave hay, and you know, we have a lot of blends where we'll have blended, where these types of hay trucks can blend the hay that we put out. But the reason why, I mean, I know a lot of nutritionists will say, well, we don't want to put hay out, but I can tell you that putting hay out for the first 3 to 4 days when we get these calves started, at least until they start to eat and get their belly full, and then we'll top dress it with our 1 ration, is key. And the other thing is that I use this to find sick cattle as well. And when I put this hay out, if there's one that's not going to the bunk, I can quick find it and get it out of the pen, or if it's hanging out at the back of the pen. And so, you know, before we had these kind of hay trucks, we had flatbed pickups with little bales, little squares. And the reason why we didn't hay was because it was work. And so, and it gets messy. Hay can be messy around the facility. So, but I'm a big believer in hay, and this is just top dressing it with the 1 ration. But the other thing is this what we don't want to see in the pen, right? Is this kind of manure patterns, because that means we've got acidosis issues and things to that nature. But I'm constantly looking at bunks, constantly looking at calves' aggressiveness to the bunk. I like them to be a little bit aggressive. I'm constantly looking at that 1.5% of body weight by a week and a half on feed, and I'm constantly reading feces in the pen. And then once we have them on hay, I go to work on acclimating these calves. And like I told you before, I'll ride pens or look for sick cattle when I feed, because all the calves come up and I start to look. I want to pull sick, not ugly. And a lot of times I just got to pulling ugly cattle and not being able to differentiate sick. And I look for calves that aren't eating, gant, they're slab-sided, depressed, dull eyes, things to that nature. But I also try to build confidence in the cattle. And I do a lot of work in acclimating. And it might be that if these calves are extremely wild when they come in and they haven't been handled, you know, it can be difficult. And I heard one person talk the other day about sale barns saying that the cattle are just being being less and less domesticated when they come to the sale barn. And we started to talk about it in our group, and we're talking about how, you know, now we have a flatbed pickup with a big bale on it, and we pull in just long enough to uncut the bale wrap, and then we unroll that bale and we drive off. Or now we have, it's cold, so we've got a cab on that tractor, and we've got fence line bunks for our cows, and we can just pull up and we can just feed the cows without getting out of the tractor. And now the way we doctor cattle in the pasture, you know, we pull up, roll down the window, and we shoot them with a gun, with a dart gun. And cattle are not stupid. They're starting to figure out that someone comes through the gate with a flatbed and no bale, someone's getting shot today. And so they're off on the back 40. So spending time with your cattle, acclimating them, helps us with the respiratory disease, because once they decide to, I mean, let's just use this way. If they don't trust you, they're not going to tell you they're sick. You don't tell your deepest secrets to someone you don't trust. And that is the calf's deepest secret. And so once they figure out, hey, you're all right and you're here to help me, just like this colt is with this guy, that's when they start to let their guard down and say, you know, I don't feel so good. Do you mind taking me to the hospital and helping me out? So those are some of the things. Then when we get them to the hospital, you know, using the normal rectal temp of a steer is 1015 to 1035, and being too high or too low from that is not good. We're using a stethoscope more and more to be more diagnostic at the chute on which calves we treat, and things to that nature. When they do get there, here's some common questions I get on antibiotics, okay? Single versus combination, and I'll just go through some of these. But, you know, no antibiotic was labeled or approved to be given in combination with another antibiotic. The FDA did not ever approve them. And sometimes when you give one or two antibiotics, one of them's bactericidal and the other is bacteriostatic, you can actually cancel out their activity. The Cleveland Children's Hospital found that giving some of the bactericidal and bacteriostatic and bactericidal drugs at the same time actually increased case fatality rates in their pediatric pneumonia cases versus just giving one. And then the pin kicker, when I moved to Texas, everybody gave a pin kicker. I didn't know what the heck a pin kicker was. And they'd give whatever antibiotic, one of our modern antibiotics, and then they'd also give a shot of penicillin because it's cheap, right? So something extra couldn't hurt. And actually it was hurting. And so use one of our modern antibiotics. I don't care which one. They all work the same, in my opinion. And it's more about finding cattle, acclimating the cattle, feeding the cattle, spending times on that. Now, we're not going to argue about that kind of stuff at the coffee shop, and we're not going to see it in the 4-color ads, but it's what makes the difference. I had one feed yard that couldn't keep the antibiotics, the pattern, like drug A versus drug B versus drug C. So I just said, all right, we're just going to drug A. And I could because I was an executive. And we just went to that, and we didn't go to any other antibiotics. They got pulled once, they got drug A. They got pulled twice, they got drug A. They got pulled 3 times, they got drug A. And our case fatality rate didn't change a bit. But we didn't have to worry about keeping track. The other thing is, people say, well, when do I give another shot? And I'm the worst person in the world to even be talking about this, because if I give one a shot and it's a 7-day moratorium for the next drug, and it's still sick on day 3, I'm going to want to help it. But I'm not helping it because there is drug on board. And so look at if it's a 7-day drug or a 4-day drug or a 2-day drug or a 1-day drug, look at the moratorium that's set and follow that. Now, a couple of things to that. Number one, if I have to treat a calf on day 1, day 3, and day 5, I don't buy a big bag of feed for that one because he is not responding and they're checking out. The other one is, on average, when you retreat a calf for bovine respiratory disease, it is 10 to 14 days after the first treatment. Okay, 10 to 14 days. We don't have any drug with a moratorium that long. So worrying about this is not nearly as important as what we think. Another thing, people say, well, I'll just put it in the vein so it'll get to the infection quicker. False, okay? If anything, it might get there 30 minutes quicker. And if it's something that sick or that big an emergency, we probably ought not be treating it ourselves. But whether it's in any of the classes of antibiotics, putting it in the vein does not get it to the site of the infection quicker or nearly enough quicker to change the outcome. This one I think is important too. Do you want to treat the animals once with a big dose, or do you want to treat them 3 days in a row with smaller doses? And with Newflor and Baytril or Enro, we used to have that option. And what I found is if I would give the bigger dose once versus the smaller dose 3 days in a row, I would cut my case fatality rate in half. The reason being, one, a lot of these are concentration dependent drugs, not duration dependent drugs. The other thing is that we put a lot of wear and tear on the cattle running them through the chute. So if you were sick and I gave you the option of one of two things, either if you came into my doctor's office and I said, well, you're pretty sick, I've got two options here. One, I can give you a dose, one big dose, and you can go home and I don't need to see you again. Or I'm going to give you a smaller dose, but you need to come into the office 3 days in a row and sit in the waiting room and wait to come in. And I'll give you the shot. And then, oh, by the way, it's twice the chance you're going to die. I think we'd all take the bigger dose and not have the wear and tear on the people and the cattle. Another question I get is what drugs, what ancillary therapies should we give? And I'll be honest with you, I don't use ancillary therapies when I treat cattle for bovine respiratory disease. The one that's used the most is vitamin C, and then Flunix and meglumine is Banamine and Dex. If there's one that I'm starting to look more towards would be the Flunixin or the Banamine a little bit, just because I'll wimp out and take Tylenol or Advil when I'm sick. But remember this, to adequately treat an animal with Banamine, you've got to do it about every 6 hours. And so when we do it once and kick them out, we make them feel better for a little bit. But so I really don't use any at this point in time as far as ancillary therapies. And if you're my age, you'll remember everything used to get B complex, right? My dad and grandpa, I'm a third generation veterinarian, and my arms were stained with B complex, and I can smell B vitamins about 100 yards away. But we don't use them anymore. The rumen creates the B vitamins for the animal. And I just have a few more slides and we'll kick it open for questions. But hospital pens are the most abused pens on the feedlot. When people say, well, how big should I, or how much room should I give cattle in the hospital pen? My answer is easy. Just give them as much room as you do in the home pen. Make sure we have clean water tank, shades. You know, when I get into things and I see water tanks that are full of moss, or I see a calf stand there in the water like this, and someone says, well, I've treated this one 3 times and it didn't get any better. I said, I believe you, right? Keep your equipment clean. That picture down below there was a balling gun that they left in a 5-gallon bucket of water that the starlings would nest or roost in that process in their doctoring shed, and they defecate in that bucket, and then they spread salmonella to all the calves that they treated because they didn't put their equipment up in the evening and keep it clean. Just so many things that you can do, and Sandy, with that, I'll open it up to questions, comments, corrections.
We do have one question, and actually a fantastic question from David. And his question is multiple parts, but here we go. How does the cattle feedlot buyer find out if the calves he purchased had vaccinations or not? David administers vaccines and pre-weans and follows the protocol correctly, but then the sale barn doesn't always announce what he did to the cattle. So he fetches the same price as cattle that had no vaccines. How does the cattle buyer know? And how does the cow-calf fella get paid back for doing the right thing?
Yep. So it's part of the thing, you know, the motto of the beef industry is do unto others before they do unto you. And you know, we have to be able to provide disclosure in our industry. And I think that what you'll see happen is we sort out good and bad cattle stockmen pretty quickly in our industry, okay? We sort out reputation and understanding of even the sale barns. And so auction markets will have different prices just because they have reputations of providing great disclosure or not, and they know their cattle and they know the cattle that are coming in. There's two things to think about here. One, you're going to pay somebody money for in our industry, and you're going to get to make the choice. If you want to buy high-risk calves that haven't had shots, then you're going to pay it to the corner office of an executive of a pharmaceutical company in antibiotics and different things when they get to your place. Or you can pay $2 to $3 a hundredweight more to somebody in our industry that's properly preparing the calves to come to your facility. I will, on the flip side, the big thing that you're selling with preconditioned calves are pounds, not the. If I can sell a calf that's 50 pounds heavier at the same price as one that's 70 pounds lighter, I'm winning on the slide. I'm also winning on selling more pounds of calf. Now, I can understand getting done at the end of the fall and you're tired and you have a lot of other things going on, going out and gathering calves, putting them on the truck, sending them to the sale barn and being done with it. But I can tell you this, that as the industry goes, we're going to have to make changes. And people say, well, I'm not going to get paid for it. I'm not going to do it. Well, I'm not going to give my kids a whole lot of money, okay, when I die. It's not going to be a big inheritance. But the thing that I do, and I spend time at nights and I spend time on the road, I've given over 900 producer meetings in the last 20 years. And it's generally gets down to what I hope I leave my family is an industry that's intact so they can enjoy what I got to do. And so I look at it as paying your inheritance forward and telling the kids, hey, I didn't get as much as I wanted for those calves, but you're going to still get to do it, is kind of payment. I know we have to make money too. So, and I know that the only way to be sustainable is to be profitable. And I don't want to do this as a hobby. A lot of this times I'm putting this out there for us to think and to have good discussion. That's a great question. It's one we've battled since Moby Dick was a minnow.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Another question that we have is, how valuable is it for the feedlot to know the BVDPI status of the animals coming in?
Well, it just depends, okay? And I think the BVDPI status on calves is important, but the thing is that for a feedlot to really capitalize on BVDPI status, that if you test one, you've got to test them all. Because if you don't test all the cattle coming in to your feedlot, then you're going to have, if you guess, you're going to guess wrong. And I promise you, I've had it where I thought it was going to be these put together 5-weight calves out of the Southeast. So I did the PI testing on them and I didn't do it on the 8-weight yearlings. And the 8-weight yearlings had BVD PIs. You just can't predict it. And so I don't think that feed yards are paying as much for that because they're not doing the entire yard. I think it's vital when you're talking about seed stock and you're thinking about cattle that are replacements that are entering a herd. I think that's more of our thing. And the most important part about BVD is vaccinating. We could vaccinate. If we vaccinate everything, we could vaccinate ourselves out of this PI mess in our country. But we just don't have, we just have a lot of people who don't vaccinate. And so we wind up having 1% of our calves born every year are both, or here's the deal. 1% of the calves born every year are BVD PIs. But at that rate, half of them die on the ranch. So 0.5% of the cattle coming into feed yards are BVD PI positive. That means I have one in every 4 pens. So that's the reason why we don't see as much value, is because there's just so much volume out there of not getting tested that it's probably, if I owned a small feed yard and I was bringing in lightweight calves, I would ear notch and BVD PI test everything that came in personally. But if you're going to do one, you've got to do them all.
Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and turn it back over to Carolyn to have another poll question.
Awesome.
Very good. Thanks, Amanda, and thank you, Dr. Thompson. So this is kind of a check your knowledge. We'll see how you remember all this great information Dr. Thompson's given us. So here we go. All right. So question number 1, it takes roughly twice as many people to ride pens and doctor high-risk cattle as it does to take care of the same number of low-risk cattle. True, false, don't know, and you'd rather not guess. Those are your options. Number 2, we expect 30% morbidity due to respiratory disease in a group of high-risk calves. If we use metaphylaxis on arrival, we will now expect what percent morbidity? Sorry, it's getting late in the day. So 10%, 15, 30, 60, or I don't know what metaphylaxis means. Question number 3, when you castrate a calf using the banding technique, you should vaccinate the calf with blackleg, manhemia, tetanus, Klebsiella, and I don't know, and I'd rather not guess. So those are your questions for...
We got a good group of people here. They're smoking this test.
Doing very good. We got some good listeners. They were quiet and listening. Very good. Give you guys a few more seconds to get your response in, and I will share the results. Very good. Share the results with you. So it was true. It takes twice as many people to ride those pens with our high-risk cattle. And you guys did your math right. It's half. So it's 15%. And then when we are banding, we should use a tetanus shot. Very good. Thank you. Dr. Thompson, do you have anything else you would like to add or share with that?
I just want to say thank you. You guys have a great group of people at the University of Wisconsin. And I appreciate you including me. And hopefully when we get through this COVID and that, being neighbors now, I'll get to come up and visit y'all and go see some operations. And you're always welcome in Iowa if you're coming through on 35 or 80.
Thank you for that. And we hope to have you up here. And for the folks still on, don't jump off because we'll keep taking questions.
Yep.
But at this point, you should be seeing my slide about a BQA roll call. So I want you to, using your chat window now, go to that chat box, click on that drop-down arrow, and pick one of the educators, Amanda, Carolyn, Bill Halfman, Ryan Sterry, or myself. Pick one and send us a chat where you tell us your name and your email address. So I would like to see you start to put that into that chat box. And I'm asking you to put it to one of the educators. If you leave it going to everyone, then we kind of lose some of our staying confidential. I don't want to necessarily share your email out there with everybody on. So go ahead and pick one of the educators. Put your name and your email there. So our BQA continuing education is all about, we're going to issue one CE unit from this evening's session. You can only earn that by watching this, by participating tonight, by playing with and answering some of those poll questions. You'll be getting an email from me, probably with your certificate on it, so keep watching for that. I'd like to remind everybody you can visit us at Livestock Extension at wisc.edu. This is our topic hub now where we are putting our articles and our events, and when you check on that program listing, you can see some of the things we're involved with our small ruminant webinars, the Badger Swine Symposium. We also got some coverage on poultry and beef and some decision-making tools and software here as well. And we have been writing some articles about preconditioning, and we're going to be putting up some more information specifically on preconditioning in the next couple weeks. Again, this is our contact information. You can get to us from that Topic Hub screen, or you can just email us straight out, Amanda, Bill, Carolyn, Ryan, and myself. Stay tuned for next week. 2 weeks. Time flies and you're having fun. 2 weeks, February 23rd, for the Hairy Heelwort presentation with Dr. Dorfer from UW Vet School. And that one is worth another continuing education BQA credit as well. So I'm going to go back to pausing on this screen while we continue to take questions in the chat. So Amanda, I'm going to let you go ahead with any more chat questions.
Thank you, Sandy. We do have one question. Let me move up here a second. Dr. Thompson, have you tried using the Vera tags to alert you to rising animal temperatures?
Yeah, and so I've used those, but you know, different tags and different modalities work good. The problem is when I get into some of these groups of high-risk calves, they're all sick, and the other thing is you'll find that some of the temperatures, the calves even on normal days will run hot and run cold. I think that's the future. I think that's going to be, and we're using that different types of technology, whether it's the pedometers or whether it's the temperature, or there's one tag that's got a combination of the two. I think those could be really, really good tools and help us. But right now, I think the jury's still out a little bit.
All right, thank you. Another question that we received, and I believe you already kind of covered this, but is there a premium for preconditioning, or is it considered a discount for individuals who do not precondition their calves?
Buying cattle is the opposite of buying a car. When you buy a car, you get a price for the base model, and then you add dollars on for toys and whistles. For cattle, we start at the Cadillac, and then we start doing deductions. And so we'll deduct for horns, deduct for testicles, deduct for not being vaccinated, deduct for balling, and that kind of thing. So it's kind of that kind of a model that we have set.
All right. Thank you. Let me scroll down here a second. On the number of cattle with lung lesions that were much higher than the number of cattle that were found and treated, how many of them maybe had the respiratory problem as a calf before they ever got to the feed yard?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know for sure, right? But I can tell you this, when I went back, I couldn't have randomized the study anymore. If you looked at the start weights on those calves, the cattle with no lung lesions weighed 553. The cattle with severe lung lesions weighed 552, and the ones with moderate weighed 553. And so that was a pretty good indication to me that it happened after they got to the feed yard. But as I have moved to Iowa and I'm in animal science, and now I've inherited a 450 cow dairy along with our beef operations, I'm learning a lot about heifer development and size of heifers and respiratory disease and scours, and watching those animals grow. So what you're saying there is exactly right. And if you don't know where they started, you don't know where they've been, you wouldn't know if that calf had lung lesions before they got to the yard. And we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of that with cattle. People, you know, it's unfortunate for our industry. It's almost the opposite of preconditioning, right? We have people that are purposely trading animals they know that are not right.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask a quick note, because it feeds into this?
Yep, go ahead.
Dr. Dan, you'd mentioned earlier, you just made a comment about the commingling at the sale yards, especially now with all this dairy beef coming into the market. Do you have much experience or been getting questions from people trying to raise dairy beef calf at the feed yard?
More.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting more and more. All my dairy buddies are putting feedlots in their dairies now, and so now they're trying to figure out how to feed those calves and how to get them started. And I think one of our biggest problem I see is over vaccination of the baby calves.
Okay.
Lots and lots of vaccines going into these animals, and so I see that as an issue. And then you know, some of the bunk reading and things of that, and people being comfortable to go with lower roughage levels and lots of different things. But yeah, I'm getting a lot of questions on treating calves, and you know, with some of these calves, you know, I had to train our pen riders too. On the flip side, I have feedlots that feed dairy cattle, and we get these lightweight calves in. Instead of looking, you know, for the calf that moves away from you, you're looking for the calf that doesn't come to you. And so changing, and the eardrop is a big deal in dairy calves versus our beef calves, you know, and looking at for mycoplasma and watery eyes. And so I'm learning a lot from our dairy family as well, and incorporating that into our pen riding and different things like that. So it's a two-way street.
We do have another question. What is the weight of fats you slaughter, or what is the weight of the fats you slaughter? I'm sorry, this question's a little bit different. Basically, what are the weight of the fats that you're looking for?
The weight of the what?
The fat cattle.
Oh, you know, we're shipping cattle whenever the packer will take them, but they're 1,400 to 1,500 pounds on steers now. Pretty big.
Okay. Another question we have is, so regardless of the size or background of cattle coming in, you recommend processing them right away with vaccinations. This person was told to wait at least 2 weeks to let them settle in so the vaccine could respond better. Would you elaborate a little bit more?
So what I do is I let them rest for every hour they're on the truck. So if they were 24-hour haul, I'd give them a day. But I would not wait 2 weeks to vaccinate cattle. And the reason is this: the longer I wait, the longer I have until antibody. Now, you may have some where the cattle are stressed and the vaccine doesn't take. But I can tell you that waiting 2 weeks or 30 days, I've seen bigger wrecks waiting to vaccinate them, thinking we're going to let them settle, because they're getting exposed. They're getting exposed the day they get off the truck. And so the sooner I vaccinate them, the sooner I'm going to get an immune system stimulated in those animals and get it rolling. You're not alone in this. There's a lot of people that do it and have done it. I'm just telling you what my opinion is.
Thank you. Another question we have is, are you for using implants before feedlot and in the feedlot?
I am an implanter. Yes. We use them on calves on the side of the cow. We'll use the one, you know, calf or low potency implant. I'll use a medium potency implant on arrival at the feed yard, and then I'll 100 days prior to slaughter, we're even cranking that down to 60 to 80 days prior to slaughter, I'll use a terminal or an aggressive high potency implant. But yeah, we're utilizing them. The implants are to feed performance as what antibiotics and metaphylaxis are to controlling BRD on high risk calves.
Okay. And then is there an accurate way to check kettle temperature using a non-contact thermometer? So something that's maybe near the ear.
Yeah, you know, the ones that I've seen are the infrared down the ear canal, but using the infrared on the outside of the calf is not really, because the reflective heat and that, so we don't really have anything yet. But if anything, there's an ear tag that, you know, shoots the infrared beam down the ear. But right now, it's all you know, pretty much rectal.
All right, thank you. And then we have a question that says, how young is too young to castrate?
Well, I don't think you can be too young. We're recommending that when you go out to put the ear tag in, now what I'll do is let the calf get up, and I'll give that cow a day with that calf, and let the cow doesn't need an ear tag to know which calf it is. So I don't have to run out there real fast and put one in the ear. And I let that calf get colostrum. And after that, when I put the ear tag in the ear, I'll go ahead, and if these are commercial calves, I'll go ahead and castrate them with a lastrator band right there on that for 48 hours. And then I'll disc bud them with a butane disc butter or paste, but to make sure we don't have horns. But I don't think you can be too early.
And then on the same note, we have a question. Do you prefer banding or knife cutting calves?
So just the bigger they get, the more I prefer knife cutting, which is contrary what most people don't want to do because they're worried about hemorrhage or one bleeding to death when we use knife and castrate. But I use the lastrator on the little guys, and then once they get 3 months of age or bigger, I'll go ahead and use a scalpel or a Newberry knife to split the scrotum. And then I will either just pull the testicles off, or I will use the Henderson tool on the big bulls. Even the 1,000-pound yearlings, I'll use the Henderson tool because when you band a calf, an 800-pound bull, or even these yearling bulls that don't make the breeding soundness exam, that is terrible. I would just assume we didn't castrate them at all and we just feed them as bulls. And I've done some studies on that. But right now, the little guys will band and the big guys will knife cut.
And then along those same lines, we have a question. Do you give a tetanus shot if you band calves at birth?
At this point in time, the jury's still out on that. That's a good question, right? I go ahead because I'll give a black leg and you can just add the tetanus toxoid. But one of the studies we've got to get done is, looking at can I vaccinate the cows and then have passive immunity against tetanus and to the calf and the colostrum. But yeah, we'll go ahead and give them that black leg and the tetanus when we do it.
Great. And then another question we have is, are there any concerns about using paste to dehorn and having the mamas lick it off?
Yes. I'm sure they do. I haven't really. It's a good question. It's probably, I don't use much paste. I use almost all like a butane disc butter out of the glove box of the pickup. Would be my, I would probably opt for that option.
Great. If anybody has any more questions, please put them in the chat box. For the moment, we've caught up on our questions.
And please make sure you're giving me your name and your email address. I'm still getting some that are just giving me a name, and I want to verify the email. So please put that in there if you want that BQA credit. There was a question too, if we're going to be sharing a recording, and the answer is yes. We are recording this. We're going to polish it and clean it and get it transcripted, and then we will make that available to everybody whose email addresses I had this evening. So watch your emails. You'll be finding things from us, either a BQA cert or the recording. And thank you, Dr. Thompson, for saying I can share the PDF of your PowerPoint. That's good to know. So again, if anybody wanted that BQA credit, you need to go in the chat box, pick one of the educators, and go ahead and put your name and your email address in there.
Well, I appreciate you having me. Joe watched the show. He knows my "see you down the road." I say that at the end of every show.
We do have more questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thoughts about when mixed groups come into the feedlot that already have social order established, leaving any bulls as such and horns on versus removing them. A large feedlot on a visit a while ago said they left them alone and it seemed less mess than removing nuts and horns.
Yeah, I'll castrate them. And I don't, on some of the feed yards, I don't touch the horn. A horn will grow a ½ inch a month. And so if they're 6 inches long when they come in and you're going to feed them for 6 months, they're going to be 3 inches longer when they leave. And as long as you can live with that and your packer buyer can live with that, then I wouldn't touch them. The only thing I do is I tip horns once they come to the feedlot. Now, if these are big Corrientes, that's different. But for the most of it, just tipping the horn, the insensible part of the horn. But I leave horns alone a lot of the times, but I would castrate them. Because you will get docked big time, huge, when you go to sell them, if you can sell them.
Another question we have is, are feedlots paying a premium if you can fill an entire pod from a single cow-calf operator?
Yeah, they like to get a full load if they can, and that will bring a premium. And you'll have people calling and fighting over your calves, trying to buy them straight off your place if you start getting hooked up with the right people.
Can you suggest any implant programs, or do you have any suggestions on implant programs?
You know, the big thing is that if you know you're going to keep something for a bull, don't implant it ever. If it's something that you're going to castrate as a steer and you're going to either feed out yourself or sell as a market animal, once that calf, at the time of branding, that 3 months, I'd give it a calf or low potency implant. Rev G, Synovex C, that kind. Heifers, you'll get the question, should we implant heifers? If you know you're going to retain the heifers in your herd, there's no need to implant them because you're not going to sell them. You don't need the pounds. But if you don't know, or you know you're going to sell them as feeders, then you're money ahead to go ahead and give them one low potency implant at 3 months and not later than 8 months. And so while they're on the cow, and it won't affect reproductive efficiency. Once they get to the feed yard and they come in, it's all based on days on feed. And, you know, there's so many different ways to do it, but I'm pretty simple. I'm going to give them an intermediate implant up front and then a terminal implant 100 days prior to slaughter. If I want to use the Synovex 1 or Revlar XS that are the sustained release implants rather than re-implanting cattle, if my facilities don't really handle those 1,000-pound critters coming in for the re-implant, then I'll just use the Rev XS and kick them out and not re-implant.
Thank you. moment, we don't have any more questions in the chat box.
So just as a reminder, you can always visit us in Wisconsin at our livestock hub. Read up on some more articles, find out some great decision tools that you can use free on your farm. Oh, and that was a question somebody asked about the BQA continuing education credits in Wisconsin. For this program, they're free. There was no prior paperwork. I'm gathering it tonight by you putting your name and your email address in that chat box to one of the educators. Again, our contact information at wisc.edu. And in 2 weeks, we hope you go ahead and register for Dr. Dorfer's presentation, and we will also be offering BQACE with that evening as well. So, any last questions, concerns while we have Dr. Dan still hostage here in his little room in Iowa? So,
Yeah, no, it's great. I appreciate you involving me. Let me know if I can do anything else.
It's great. We need to hear from the feed yard point of view because a lot of our producers are sending you calves eventually. So
I get close up there, that upper Iowa beef and different packs. So again, we're great neighbors to each other and look forward to many more sessions.